I remember the day the desert grew still, as if the sun itself had paused its long walk across the heavens to watch. Heat shimmered against the wide horizon, and the bones of cattle lay scattered like forgotten prayers in the dust. The air tasted of copper and sorrow, and somewhere far off, a hawk's cry split the silence. That was the moment I first saw her. On her knees in the sand, her dress torn and heavy with blood, 3 red-feathered arrows lodged deep in her back. Each breath she drew was ragged, but her eyes, though glazed with pain, clung to life as though it were a child she refused to let go. Her name was Clara Whitfield. Once she had sung hymns so sweet in the church choir that even the roughest ranch hands lingered by the door to listen. But time and shame have a cruel way of wearing a soul down. Folks whispered after she was left standing alone at the altar, her betrothed gone with the wind, her pride scattered like ashes. I had heard the gossip myself, in the hush of the mercantile, in the way women turned their heads, pitying and cruel all at once. But that day in the desert, she was no story, no whisper. She was flesh and blood and the tremble of a voice that rasped, "Please, don't pull it." I was Elias McGraw, a man no better in the eyes of town. A failed crop behind me, a brother lost to the bottle, and more silence than friends to my name. Folks said I was cursed. That trouble hung about me like dust on a saddle. And maybe they were right. For when I stumbled across Clara, I froze, not out of fear but shame. The last time I'd tried to save a soul, I had failed, and it had carved something hollow in me. Now here she was, asking me not to touch the very arrows that might kill her. Her words hit me harder than any bullet. I knelt by her side, my hand hovering near the blood. She flinched, her eyes wary even in their haze, as if she feared me more than death itself. And I, God forgive me, understood. I'd worn that mistrust before, had seen it etched in my own reflection. My chest tightened. If I obeyed her wish, she might die. If I defied it, she might curse me for the pain. I was paralyzed, caught between mercy and guilt. Still, I could not leave her. With all the care I could summon, I lifted her slight frame into my arms. The desert pressed close around us, but I found shade beneath a lone cottonwood tree by a dry creek bed. Its roots clung stubbornly to the earth as though refusing to let go. There I laid her down, my hands shaking as I poured water past her cracked lips. Her blouse, once white, was drenched in crimson. Dust clung to her hair, to her lashes. She murmured half-dreams, snippets of the cruel voices of town. Cursed bride, poor girl. No man wants the broken. Her pain spilled not just from wounds, but from the weight of memory. I sat with her, listening, feeling each word pierce me as though the arrows were in my back too. For I knew what it was to be pointed at, whispered about, shunned until the silence of your own name became unbearable. And in her brokenness, I saw my own reflected clear. The hours stretched long beneath that tree. I wetted a strip of cloth and pressed it against her skin, my fingers trembling. I did not speak much. I never was good with words. But I found myself humming an old hymn, one my mother used to sing when the nights were endless. My voice cracked with rust, yet it seemed to soften the furrow of her brow. She stirred, her eyes catching mine for the first time. There was no trust there yet, only the faintest recognition, like a lantern lit in a window far away. When her dress slipped, exposing the torn fabric and her skin beneath, I turned my gaze and adjusted the cloth to shield her. Not out of duty, but respect. For the first thing shame steals is dignity, and I could not bear to take more from her. Her breath steadied, and in that silence, it felt as if the desert itself held its breath. As night began to fall, I whispered to her, words rough as gravel, but truer than any prayer I'd spoken aloud. Don't give in. Clara, I'll carry the shame with you. And though her eyes closed, a faint line softened her mouth as if some part of her believed me. The road back to town stretched like an endless scar across the earth, each mile a test of will. Clara leaned against me, her breath shallow, her strength ebbing with every step of the mule's hooves on dust. I felt the weight of her body in my arms when she faltered, though I carried it as if it were my own penance. The arrows still stood like grim standards from her back, and I prayed with every heartbeat that she would hold on long enough to see shelter. But word travels faster than hooves in a small town. By the time we reached the outskirts, the air was already heavy with whispers. Faces turned at windows. Children paused in play. A cluster of women by the well pressed their kerchiefs to their lips, their eyes sharp as knives. I felt their gaze like heat on my skin. "There she is," one voice murmured, though it carried clear as a bell. Dragged back by Elias McGraw, no less. "Trouble calls to trouble." Clara lowered her eyes, shame burning hotter than the fever in her veins. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, in the tremor of her hands. Pain she could withstand. Humiliation was a deeper wound. I tightened my hold, guiding her away from the gawking crowd, past the church bell that tolled like judgment. We found a small shack at the edge of town, its wood weathered, its windows broken. Inside, dust motes swirled like restless spirits in the glow of a single candle I lit. I sat Clara down gently and washed my hands in a cracked basin before tending to her wounds. My fingers trembled more than hers when I cut the fabric from around the arrows, yet I worked as steady as I could. She watched me in silence, her eyes glassy but alert. What struck me was not her weakness but her restraint. She did not plead, did not curse, did not weep. She endured. And in her endurance I saw something holy, an ember refusing to be smothered. I spooned broth to her lips, careful not to spill. She sipped slowly, her gaze never leaving mine. In that gaze there was no pity, only the smallest flicker of trust, fragile as a newborn foal. I tended her like one might tend sacred ground, bandages pressed, blood wiped, water poured with reverence. At last she spoke, her voice rough as sand. "They'll talk." "They always do." I did not answer at first. Instead, I wrung out the cloth and laid it cool across her brow. Then, quietly, I said, "Let them. They've had my name in their mouths for years. It won't break me, and it won't break you either." Her lips parted as if to argue, but something in her stilled. She lowered her eyes and a tear slid free, not from pain, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. Night stretched long. Between us, words gave way to gestures, her hand grazing mine when I adjusted the bandage. The slow exhale of trust when I lifted her to sip water. The silence that grew not from distance, but from closeness too raw for speech. At dawn, the reckoning came. A deputy, spurred on by town gossip, arrived with 2 men behind him. Their boots struck hard against the shack's floor as they entered. "Elias McGraw," the deputy spat. "They're saying you led her into ambush, that you've always been the kind to draw trouble like flies to rot." The words hung heavy. Clara, still pale, struggled to rise. I reached to steady her, but she pulled from me and, with every ounce of strength she had left, stood on her own feet. Blood seeped fresh through her bandages, staining her torn blouse, but her eyes blazed. The deputy sneered. "What's she to you, Elias? Another curse you'll drag to the grave?" Before I could answer, Clara's voice rang out, low but steady, carrying through the doorway to where townsfolk had gathered to listen. "He did not leave me to die." Her breath hitched, but she pressed on, louder now, each word cutting like a blade. "He carried me back to life." The room stilled. Even the deputy's bluster faltered, caught in the weight of her truth. Outside, the murmurs died, replaced by the uneasy hush of shame shifting from us to them. Dust drifted through the open doorway, catching the morning sun, as if the earth itself bore witness. I felt her hand reach for mine then, bloodied, trembling, yet strong in its grasp. And in that touch was something deeper than gratitude, something stronger than the judgment of 100 wagging tongues. It was survival shared, shame carried together, dignity reclaimed, the deputy muttered, his pride broken, and left. One by one, the crowd dispersed, their silence louder than any accusation. Clara leaned against me, her strength spent, but a faint smile touched her lips. For the first time, I saw not just the wounded woman I'd found in the desert, but the unyielding spirit of someone who had faced down both death and disgrace and stood taller for it. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the shack's floor. It lit her face, worn and weary, yet beautiful in its defiance. And I thought then that perhaps curses were nothing more than stories told by those too small to bear the sight of true resilience. So hear me now, you who carry your own scars. When the world gossips, let it. Their whispers are smoke, fleeting and thin. What matters are the hands that hold you steady when you stumble, the voices that hum old hymns when your strength is gone, the souls who choose to see you whole even when you are broken. That is where life begins again, quietly, stubbornly, like roots clinging to earth beneath a desert sky.